Hello to another video of the QFTest video tutorial about testing web UIs with QFTest. As already mentioned in the first part of this video tutorial, I would like to point out that this video tutorial deals with testing web UIs. We use testing web UIs in place of all supported UI technologies like Java and Windows because the concepts and usage of QFTest are more or less the same. You can find explicit hints about the marginal differences in the written form of the tutorial. In this video, we talk about dealing with variables and parameters of procedures, which you can also find in Chapter 15, Variables and Procedures Parameters, in the written form of this tutorial. Variables allow you to replace specific input values or check values with flexible values. Those values can be self-defined or even calculated. You can find more about variables in a specific video about variables on this channel. Today, we will start with introducing a variable to a procedure. Then we will inspect the table of variable bindings, which we will use during the debugging process afterwards. As next step, we will meet several ways of setting variable values, and finally, we will take a look at the levels of variable bindings. Let's start introducing variables to our test suite. For this chapter, we use the demo test suite first web test QFT again. If we open both test cases, the first and the second one, and inspect the test step check final price in both test cases, we see that we actually found a new candidate for a procedure if we follow the concepts which we met in the procedures part of this tutorial. So we have the same workflow. Both test steps consist of a check text. The only difference between those test steps is the expected value, because this depends on the test case. But if we would like to make a common procedure now in order to share the way of checking the text, how can we deal with that difference between the expected values? And for this question, variables bring the solution. So let's first make a procedure and then let's introduce the variables. So I select the check text in the first test step. Then I open the context menu and I pack the check text into a sequence. And then I rename the sequence to something like check final price and confirm that change. The way of spelling the name of the sequence is some kind of a programmer style now. You may use any arbitrary name and any arbitrary characters you want. So it's just something which you need to recognize again. As next step, I will transform that sequence via the transform node into a procedure. And subsequently, I will call that procedure in the second test step. And in the second test step, I will delete the check text node, which is not required anymore. And now we need to solve the issue with the specific value of the check. As first step, I select the procedure, check final price. Then in its attributes, I will add a new parameter default value via pressing the green plus, the add new row button. And there I specify the name price, and I will specify the first value which I expect, which is $13,010. And I confirm that. As first step, I will select the procedure check final price, will just open it, and now I will add a parameter default value in its details. So here in the details of the procedure, I will find the green plus button, add new row, which I click, and there I specify the variable name price and a value like $13,049, which I confirm. The next step is to make use of that variable price, which I have defined at the procedure level now. And where should I use it? I need to use it in the check text node, in its details in the expected text. And there I'm going to access the variable price now via $, parenthesis open, price, parenthesis close. So price is the name of the variable, and $, parenthesis open, parenthesis close, is the syntax of QFTest in order to access the value of a variable. Without $parenthesis, QFTest will just take the text price, which is definitely wrong because we need the specific value. As next step, let's call the first test case. Because I haven't started the application yet, let's also run the setup. So I mark this test case in the setup and I press start test run. Oh, the test case passed. So it seems that we introduced the variable correctly. But where could we see what really happened? Of course, in the one log. So let me open the one log once. And then let me select the procedure, check final price. And there in the check text, we see $30,049. And below the check text node, we see one more node, which is called expansion of text. $parenthesis price has been replaced with $13,049. So QFTest even logs any variable replacements in its one log. So our modification worked. That's fine. Let's close the one log and proceed. But what about the second test case now? Will it pass? Actually, no, because I do expect the test case to fail because we have another value which we expect here because the second test case is granting 10% discount, of course. But before we run the second test case, let me just ensure that the debugger settings of QFTest are enabled. So the debugger is enabled and the options are set to break on error. So in case of an error, QFTest will immediately interrupt the execution, and that's what I would like to have now. So if I select the test case second and if I run it, QFTest should interrupt at the second check, and that's what it did. And here we see the error message. We expected $13,049 and we got $26,100. Of course, we could jump into the one log now, but there we would find more or less the same information. In this case, we know that the root cause of the error is the wrongly inserted variable value in the procedure check final price, which I have recently added. But before we proceed, let's just talk about how should we analyze such errors with wrong variable values if we can't recall what went wrong. For that, you can confirm the error message. And on the right bottom corner, directly besides the terminal, you see the variables section, which is opened by the debugging functionality of QFTest. And if you resize it a little bit so that you have a better size for it to read, there you will see that you have all the variable bindings shown in the variable section. And there you will find an entry procedure for check final price, which sets the variable price to $13,049. So in this table, we see that there is a wrong variable value defined. And that's pretty useful in order to find wrongly defined values of variables during the execution. By the way, if we jump into the one log and jump to the error message, very close to the error message, you find a node stack trace, which also contains a so-called execution stack, which is actually the same. So you see the procedure check final price, setting a variable, which one, price to $30,049. So you can also see that information directly in the one log. But how could we fix this now? How could we get the second test case passing and the first test case passing using the same procedure? First, let me stop the test run. QFTest offers many ways of making procedures as flexible as desired. I will show you one of the fastest ways now. First, you select the procedure check final price. Then you open the context menu, go for additional node operations, and there you will find something like update parameters of references. If you select this, you will get a dialog which you simply confirm. After a couple of seconds, you get another dialog called updated nodes, which shows you any nodes which have been updated by QFTest. That's okay. It seems that we have 2 procedure calls being updated. Let's close that dialog now. And if we take a look at the call procedure of the second test case now, we see that the check final price call has a variable definition being added, price set to $30,049. By the way, at the first procedure call of the first test case, we see the same. And that's the result of the operation update parameters of references. And now we can simply select the call procedure of the second test case and adapt it to the desired value, like 26,100. And so we have completely parameterized the check final price procedure and even used it twice with different values. So what were the steps once again? First, we added the desired variable to the procedure. Then we replaced the specific value at the check text node. Then we called the procedure accordingly. Then we opened the context menu and updated the parameters of the references. And then we selected the respective procedure calls and adapted the values which we require in the specific test cases. Before we run the second test case, let's take a look at a second way of debugging and analyzing variable values. You can consider to set a breakpoint at the procedure call, like I'm doing now. So I set a breakpoint there. And if we start the test run, QFTest will pause the execution once it reaches the breakpoint. And now we will use the variable bindings table again in order to inspect the current variable values. So what do we see? We see the test step here at the top having no bindings, so there are no variables set. If we use single step of the QFTest debugging functionality, we jump from the procedure call to the procedure. And now in the variable bindings, we will find the call procedure node setting the variable price to 26,100. And now we could directly recognize whether the value is fine or not. If it's wrong, we could go back to the call procedure, change it to whatever value we want, and then open the context menu there and use the continue execution from here command just to rerun that procedure call again. So something similar as we did in the debugging video. And if we go ahead with single step and single step, we can take a look at the variable bindings again, and then we will see the respective price being used. So we will talk about this later, but what we can already recognize here, if you access a variable like price, QFTest walks through the variable bindings table and always takes the first match of the variable name. So here the variable price is matching, so this variable price is being taken into account. But we will learn more about this table. So now we met the single step execution again, we met the continue execution from here command again, and the variable bindings, which you already knew from the part of debugging. And so we see that debugging is very important for variables, especially if you want to analyze issues with variables in your test suite. And this was a topic of setting variables and values at call procedure level. But there are plenty of other nodes which allow to set variable values. The first node is the so-called set variable node, which you can insert via insert node, miscellaneous nodes, set variable. Then you define a name of the variable like price and a value like 1000 and press OK. By the way, we already met this node earlier. This node has been used in the setup node in the first sequence to set the client variable, and then in the if nodes to set the operating system specific variables like browser and the connection mode and so on. Besides that set variable node, you can find more nodes in the miscellaneous menu, like the fetch text, the fetch index, or the fetch geometry nodes. Those nodes retrieve information from your application and store the corresponding values into variables. The fetch text node reads the current value of something. Fetch index reads the current position of a sub-item in a table or list. And fetch geometry reads the size and location of a given component. In addition to the fetch nodes, any kind of check node, check text, check boolean, and so on, can store its result in the attribute variable for result. And then you can use that variable later in if conditions and so on. And within the entire test suite tree, you can set variables at the test suite level. There you have a table variable definitions. And you can also set them at the test case level. There you also have a table variable definitions, as well as at test step or sequence level, because they also have a variable definitions table. In order to consolidate our knowledge of variables now, let's build an example. The aim of my example should be that we create a procedure which stores the shown discount value here in a variable, and then we will use that variable later in the test case. In order to use that procedure, I will create a third test case. So I select the second test case, call insert node, test and sequence node test case, call it third, press OK. As next, I need to create the procedure. So I open the procedure section and call insert node procedures node procedure. I call that sequence read discount, as I would like to read the discount. And then I'm going to call that procedure and insert the procedure via drag and drop to the test case, which creates a call procedure node. Instead of using drag and drop, I could have used right mouse click, insert node, procedure nodes, call procedure, but drag and drop is actually faster. But how to get the current text of that discount field now? Therefore, let me record a mouse click at the discount field once and stop the recording. Now I can select the mouse click and open the context menu and use the transform node command, because the transform node command allows me to transform any events like mouse click, text inputs and so on in any fetch nodes and vice versa. So I choose fetch text now because I would like to read the current text. In the variable name, I will specify a meaningful name like discount and confirm it. And then I can move the fetch text node into my procedure read discount. Instead of inserting the procedure manually and moving the recorded or the transformed fetch text to the procedure, I could have transformed the recorded sequence directly into a procedure, but I haven't done yet. So I can simply delete that sequence for now. Okay, and as next step, I select the call procedure in the third test case, and there is an attribute called variable for return value, and there I can define a variable which stores the result of the corresponding procedure, in my case the read discount procedure, into a test case specific variable like current discount. And now one more step is missing. We would like to store the result of the procedure read discount into the variable current discount. So we need to go back to the procedure read discount and tell the procedure that it should give back a result to any caller, to any test case using that procedure. And for that, you can select the last node of that procedure, in my case the fetch text. You open the context menu, insert node, procedure nodes, return, because the return node is giving a result back to the call procedure nodes of test cases. And then we have the attribute return value, and now we can specify a value which we would like to give back. In our case, we would like to return the value of the variable discount, which we have set by the fetch text node. And we need to return the value of the variable, so we use dollar parenthesis discount parenthesis close. Without dollar parenthesis, we would just return the text discount, which we actually don't want to. So then I confirm it, and that's it. That's my first example. So we have the fetch text reading the current discount value into a variable discount. Then we return the value of that variable discount to a procedure call, to a call procedure node, which stores its result in a variable called current discount. Admittedly, that's a complex sample, which illustrates different ways of setting variables using a fetch text node, using a return value to give results to procedure callers, and storing results of procedures via the variable for return value of call procedure nodes. As last part of this chapter, we should inspect the validity of variables. Can we access variables everywhere in our test suite? Or will we lose values of variables during the test run once we pass a certain node? Variables set at test suite level are valid for all nodes within that test suite. This means you can access those variables defined at the variable definitions at the test suite node in any test case, in any sequence, in any call procedure inside that test suite. Variables defined at the variable definitions table can be accessed by any node inside the test case. Those variables are not valid for other test cases anymore, because other test cases have their own variable definitions table. And it's the same way with variables set at test step level or at call procedure nodes. So variables defined at the variable definitions table at the call procedure are only valid for that particular procedure call. But what about variables defined at a certain set node, like a set variable, like a fetch text, or like a call procedure node in its return value? Each of those nodes has an attribute called local variable. By default, local variable is unchecked. There is a setting in the QFTest option to change that default. If the checkbox is unchecked, the corresponding variable will be defined globally as so-called global variable. This means every node inside the test suite will be able to access that variable once the variable has been set once. So the variable is valid till the process of QFTest ends. So you can set a variable in the first test case and use it later in the fourth or in the fifth test case. If the local variable is checked, the variable will be bound locally to its most meaningful parent. What's that? If we go to the procedure read discount what we have recently created, and if we select the fetch text node, there we have the discount variable, and if we set it to a local variable, the variable discount set by the fetch text node will only be accessible inside that procedure read discount. So if local variable is being set inside a procedure, the variable is locally defined for that particular procedure. If we select the call procedure node for the read discount procedure of our previous example, there we have the variable for return value, current discount. And if we set this locally via checking local variable, the variable current discount is locally bound to the test case. So current discount can only be read and used inside the test case cert. And in the upcoming test cases, it can't be accessed anymore. So test cases being executed afterwards need to call the procedure read discount again. And if you want to know which variable can be accessed inside a procedure or inside a test case, you can use the debugger and its variable bindings table to analyze it. So let's just do that exercise for the third test case. So we select the third test case, start the debugger via single step. So we see at the top the test case node cert having no variables. Then we see global variables, 4 global variables, all coming from the setup node. We also see that it's possible to set variables by command line, which is pretty useful if you want to integrate QFTest to CI tools. And then we see the test suite variables defined at test suite level. In my case, there are none of them. And then we see a fallback stack, which just shows default values defined at procedure level or at the default values of a test case. So at the moment we stand at the call procedure node for read discount. If we jump into it via single step, and if we just click single step once again, we stand at fetch text. At the fetch text node, we click single step once again. Now QFTest is about to execute the return node. And there we see 2 more levels being inserted to our variable bindings. At the top, we see the procedure read discount, which has one binding. Which one? The variable discount, having the value 0% or 0%, which comes from the application. So the variable discount is locally bound to that procedure. The call procedure node has no parameters in my case, so that's why we don't see any variable definitions here. And then we see the test case and globals and command line variables again, and so forth. And if we execute single step again, QFTest ends with the execution because the read discount procedure is over. If there were one more node, we would see the current discount variable locally bound to the test case in the variable bindings. That was a challenging but very exciting chapter about variables. We introduced a variable to a procedure, in our case the check final price procedure. Then we met the variable bindings table quite often. This table is really useful for debugging in order to see the current variable values and which variables are actually defined. Then we set values by the setVariable node, by multiple fetch nodes like the fetch text, and we even used a return value to give a result of a procedure back to a call procedure node. And finally, we learned about the different layers of variables like local and global variables. The concept of variables is one of the most powerful features to create flexible and robust test cases. And now the ball is in your court again. Try to debug the demo test suite to learn more about variables, and try to introduce variables to your test suite on your own.